The morning of June 5th, 1944, dawned grey and cold over the English Channel, private first class. James Michael Sullivan stood on the deck of the USS Samuel Chase, his weathered hands gripping a worn photograph of his family back in Boston. The paper was soft from countless touches, the edges frayed from being folded and unfolded in moments of homesickness. His mother's smile seemed to fade slightly more each time he looked at it, as if the distance between them was eroding even this small connection. His younger sister Mary stood beside their mother, her gap-toothed grin frozen in time from 2 years ago, before he'd shipped out. His father, proud and stern in his Sunday best, stood with one hand on James's shoulder in the photograph, a gesture that now felt like both a blessing and a burden. The sea churned beneath the massive invasion fleet, hundreds of vessels stretching as far as the eye could see. Each ship carried men just like James, boys from small towns and big cities, from farmlands and factories, all bound together by a single purpose that seemed too enormous to comprehend. Tomorrow, they would storm the beaches of Normandy. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, in the final hours before the greatest amphibious invasion in human history, James Sullivan sat in the cramped belly of the transport ship and tried to write a letter that might be his last. The hold smelled of diesel fuel, salt water, and fear masked by cigarette smoke and nervous laughter. Men played cards under dim lights, their hands shaking slightly as they dealt. Others cleaned their rifles for the 100th time, the repetitive motion a meditation against the unknown. Sergeant William Buck Patterson, a weathered veteran of the North Africa campaign, moved among the men with quiet authority, checking equipment and offering words of encouragement that rang hollow against the magnitude of what awaited them. Buck had seen combat before, had watched friends die in the Tunisian desert, and the knowledge showed in the permanent crease between his eyebrows and the way his eyes never quite focused on anything nearby. If you're watching this story unfold, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support means everything as we share these important stories of courage and sacrifice. James held his pen over the blank paper, struggling to find words adequate to the moment. How do you tell your mother you might die tomorrow? How do you reassure your kid sister when you're terrified yourself? How do you thank your father for teaching you to be brave when bravery feels like a thin veneer over pure terror? The pen felt heavy, heavier than his rifle, heavier than the 60 pounds of equipment he'd carry onto the beach. Writing home, Sully? The voice belonged to Private Tommy Chen, a second-generation Chinese-American from San Francisco who bunked next to James. Tommy was always smiling, always cracking jokes, but tonight his usual cheerfulness seemed forced, mechanical. "Trying to," James replied, his Boston accent thickening with emotion. "Can't find the right words." Tommy sat down on the bunk across from him, pulling out his own sheet of paper. "My old man told me something before I left. He said, 'In life, we don't always get to choose our moments, but we can choose how we face them.' I've been thinking about that a lot lately." "Your father sounds wise. He ran a laundry in Chinatown for 30 years, worked 16-hour days, 6 days a week. Never complained. When I enlisted, he didn't try to stop me, but I saw him cry for the first time in my life." Tommy's voice cracked. "I need to make him proud tomorrow. I need to make it mean something." The two young men sat in companionable silence for a moment, each lost in thoughts of home and family, and the incomprehensible reality that tomorrow they would wade through the surf into a wall of German machine gun fire. Around them, the symphony of pre-battle nerves played out in 100 small ways. Private Danny O'Brien from Brooklyn threw up quietly into a bucket for the 3rd time that evening. Corporal Robert Bobby Washington from Mississippi, one of the few black soldiers in their unit, sat reading his worn Bible, lips moving in silent prayer. Private First Class, Anthony Russo, from Chicago's Little Italy, sharpened his combat knife with methodical precision, the scraping sound rhythmic and somehow comforting. Buck Patterson appeared beside them, his stern face softening slightly. "You boys should get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be the longest day of your lives." "Sarge, you really think we can do this?" James heard himself ask, surprised by his own boldness. "Take those beaches?" Buck sat down heavily, the bunk creaking under his weight. He was 34 years old, ancient compared to most of the men under his command, and every one of those years showed in the lines around his eyes. "I've seen what Americans can do when we're pushed to the wall, Sullivan. In Tunisia, I watched a kid from Iowa, couldn't have been more than 19, hold off an entire German platoon long enough for the rest of us to regroup. Took 3 bullets doing it. Before he died, you know what he said? He said, 'Did we get him, Sarge? Tell me we got him.'" The sergeant paused, his jaw working as he fought emotion. "That's who we are. We're not fighting for glory or conquest. We're fighting because it's right, because someone has to stand up to evil. Tomorrow, when those landing craft ramps drop and all hell breaks loose, you remember that. You remember you're fighting for every person back home who can't fight for themselves. You're fighting for your mother and your sister, and for Tommy's father who came to this country looking for a better life. You're fighting for the simple right to live free." James felt something harden inside him, a core of determination solidifying beneath the fear. He picked up his pen again and began to write. "Dear Mom, Dad, and Mary, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it home like I promised. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for all the worry I've caused you and for the grief you must be feeling now, but I need you to know that I'm not sorry for being here, for doing this. Tomorrow, we land in France. They're calling it D-Day, though I suspect it will have a grander name in the history books. We're going to liberate Europe, one beach, one town, one country at a time. It's the most important thing I'll ever do, even if I don't live to see it finished. Dad, you taught me that a man's worth is measured by what he's willing to stand for, even when standing is hard. You showed me that every day, going to the factory when your back hurt, providing for us when times were lean, never giving up no matter what. I'm standing now, Dad. I'm standing for freedom and for everything America represents. I hope that makes you proud. Mum, your love has been the constant in my life, the warmth I carry in my heart even here, thousands of miles from home. When I'm scared, I think of your prayers. I know you're praying for me now, and I feel those prayers like armor around me. Whatever happens tomorrow, know that your love made me brave enough to face it. Mary, my little cricket, you're probably all grown up now. I still picture you as the 7-year-old who cried when I left, but you'll be 9 by the time you read this, maybe even older. Be good for Mom and Dad. Study hard in school. Make something of yourself in this country that we're all fighting to preserve. Live the life I wanted to live. Fall in love. Have children. Tell them about their Uncle Jimmy who believed in something bigger than himself. The men around me are the finest people I've ever known. We come from every corner of this great nation. We speak different languages, worship in different ways, look different from each other, but we're united in purpose. We're Americans, and that means something profound. It means we believe in liberty and justice for all, not just for some. It means we stand against tyranny wherever it raises its ugly head. It means we're willing to sacrifice everything so that others can live free. If I don't come home, please don't let it break you. Mourn me, yes, but then live. Live fully and joyfully. That's the America I'm fighting for. A place where people can pursue happiness without fear, where children can grow up in peace, where hope isn't a luxury, but a birthright. I love you all more than words can express. You are my heart, my home, my reason for being here. And if God grants me the strength to survive tomorrow, I swear I'll come back to you. I'll walk through that door in Boston, sweep you all into my arms, and never take a single moment of our time together for granted again. But if that's not his plan, if tomorrow is my last day, then know this: I died believing in America. I died fighting for a future I may never see, but one I know is worth every sacrifice. I died surrounded by brothers in arms who share that belief, and I died with your faces in my mind and your love in my heart. Take care of each other. Be kind to your neighbors. Raise your children to understand that freedom is never free, that every generation must decide whether to fight for it or lose it. Tell them about this war, about what we did, and why it mattered. Don't let them forget. All my love, always and forever, your son and brother, James Michael Sullivan, Private First Class, United States Army, June 5th, 1944. James folded the letter carefully, his tears falling freely now. He wasn't ashamed of them. Only a fool wouldn't be afraid of what awaited them. Only someone who'd never loved anyone wouldn't fear leaving them behind. He tucked the letter into his jacket's inner pocket, next to his heart, where the photograph of his family resided. Around him, other men were writing their own letters, making their own peace with mortality. The hold had grown quieter as the night deepened, the nervous energy giving way to somber reflection. Some men prayed. Others simply stared at nothing, lost in private thoughts. A few slept fitfully, their dreams troubled by visions of what morning would bring. Tommy Chen finished his own letter and looked up at James. You think they'll remember us? 100 years from now, you think anyone will know we were here? Does it matter? James asked, though he understood the question perfectly. Every man wanted his life to mean something, wanted to believe his sacrifice wouldn't be forgotten. I suppose not, Tommy admitted. We're not doing this for fame or recognition. We're doing it because it's right. Because it's right, James echoed, finding comfort in the simple truth of those words. Private O'Brien approached them, his face pale but determined. Sully Chen, I just want you to know. If anything happens to me tomorrow, tell my ma I love her. Tell her I was brave. You tell her yourself, Danny, James said firmly. We're all walking off that beach together. Together, O'Brien repeated, as if testing the word's power to make it true. Sergeant Patterson stood and addressed the entire hold, his voice carrying the weight of command and compassion. Listen up, men. I'm not going to lie to you. Tomorrow will be hell. You're going to see things no human being should ever have to see. You're going to be more afraid than you've ever been in your lives. But you're also going to discover something about yourselves. You're going to learn that you're stronger than you knew, braver than you believed, and capable of more than you ever imagined. He paused, looking each man in the eye. We're the tip of the spear, boys. The first wave. Everything depends on us taking those beaches and holding them so the rest can follow. It's a heavy responsibility, I know. But I've trained with you. I've watched you grow from scared kids into soldiers. And I'm telling you right now, there's no other group of men I'd rather have beside me when that ramp drops. The sergeant's voice grew rough with emotion. You represent the best of America, every small town and big city, every farm and factory, every hope and dream of a free people. Tomorrow, you carry those hopes onto the beaches of Normandy. You carry the prayers of millions who are counting on us to win this war and come home. And by God, that's exactly what we're going to do. A ripple of determination moved through the assembled men, a collective straightening of spines and squaring of shoulders. Fear didn't disappear. It never would. But it was joined now by purpose, by the knowledge that they were part of something larger than themselves. Corporal Washington stood and began singing softly, his rich baritone filling the hold with the strains of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. One by one, other voices joined in, white and black, Catholic and Protestant and Jewish, farm boys and city kids, all united in song. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. James sang with them, feeling the connection to something greater than his individual fear. The song spoke of sacrifice and righteousness, of a cause worth dying for. As the last notes faded, a profound silence settled over the men, a silence filled with unspoken brotherhood and shared resolve. The night wore on with agonizing slowness. Some men managed to sleep, exhausted by anxiety. Others played quiet games of poker for cigarettes and promises. James found himself talking with soldiers he'd barely known before, sharing stories of home and family, creating bonds that would either carry them through hell or be severed forever by dawn's light. Private Russo, the tough kid from Chicago, showed James a picture of his girl, Maria. "We're supposed to get married when I get back. Been engaged since before I shipped out. She writes me every week, never misses. Last letter, she said she's saving every penny from her job at the munitions factory so we can buy a little house in the suburbs. White picket fence, the whole dream." "You'll get back to her," James said, with more confidence than he felt. "Yeah," Russo agreed, staring at the photograph. "Yeah, I will, because the alternative is her spending the rest of her life wondering what could have been, and I can't do that to her. I promised her forever, and a Russo always keeps his promises." As midnight passed and the early hours of June 6th crept forward, the atmosphere in the hold shifted subtly. The waiting was almost over. Soon they would know their fates. The anticipation was almost worse than the prospect of battle itself. At least in combat, there would be action, purpose, the clarity that comes with doing, rather than waiting. At 0200 hours, Sergeant Patterson gathered his squad for final preparations. They checked equipment with methodical precision. M1 Garand rifles were inspected and re-inspected. Ammunition pouches were counted and recounted. Canteens were filled. Dog tags were verified. Each man carried a small first aid kit, a gas mask they prayed they wouldn't need, and enough ammunition to fight their way off the beach and into France. "Remember your training," Buck told them, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "Stay low, move fast, and look out for the man beside you. We're a team. We fight together, we survive together, we win together. No heroes, no glory seekers, just soldiers doing their jobs." He distributed small American flags, one for each man. "Keep this close. When you're on that beach and it feels like the whole world is trying to kill you, remember what this represents. Remember why we're here." James tucked the flag into his pocket alongside his letter and photograph. 3 things that connected him to home, to purpose, to meaning. They felt like talismans against the chaos that awaited. At 03:30 hours, they received the order to prepare for loading. The men gathered their equipment, the weight of it suddenly real and substantial. 60 pounds of gear, including rifles, ammunition, rations, water, entrenching tools, and personal items. They would carry this burden into the surf, onto the beach, and into history. The climb up to the deck was slow, men filing through narrow corridors and up steep ladders. When James emerged into the pre-dawn darkness, the sight that greeted him stole his breath. The English Channel was filled with ships as far as he could see, their lights creating a constellation on the water. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and thousands of landing craft. The Armada of Liberation, the greatest seaborne invasion force ever assembled. The air was cold and damp, filled with the smell of salt and diesel. Overhead, the drone of aircraft filled the sky. Allied bombers and fighters, thousands of them, heading toward France to soften the German defenses. The sound was deafening and somehow comforting. They weren't alone in this. The full might of American and Allied power was converging on those beaches. "Lord have mercy," Tommy Chen whispered beside James. "Have you ever seen anything like this?" "Never imagined anything like this," James replied, overwhelmed by the scale of what they were attempting. This was more than a battle. This was the turning point of the war, perhaps of human history. If they succeeded, Europe could be liberated. If they failed, the war might drag on for years, with countless more casualties and suffering. The landing craft waited, bobbing in the choppy water alongside the transport ship. They were called Higgins boats, flat-bottomed vessels designed by a Louisiana boat builder named Andrew Higgins. Each could carry 36 men and would deposit them directly onto the beach, or try to. Intelligence suggested the Germans had fortified the beaches with elaborate defenses, concrete bunkers, machine gun nests, artillery positions, mines, and obstacles designed to rip the bottoms out of landing craft. As dawn approached, the sky began to lighten from black to deep blue to grey. The weather was still poor, with high winds and rough seas. General Eisenhower had delayed the invasion by 1 day already due to weather. If they waited longer, the tides wouldn't be right for another 2 weeks, and the Germans would have more time to strengthen their defences. So they were going, regardless of conditions. At 0500 hours, the naval bombardment began. Battleships and cruisers opened fire on the French coast, their massive guns sending shells screaming toward German positions. The sound was apocalyptic, like the world was tearing itself apart. Flashes of light lit up the horizon as shells impacted. The bombardment was meant to destroy German fortifications and demoralize the defenders. James prayed it would work. "Mount up!" The order came down the line. Time to board the landing craft. James climbed down the cargo net hanging from the side of the transport ship, his hands gripping the rough rope as the ship rolled in the waves. Below him, the Higgins boat rose and fell with the swells. Timing his jump would be critical. Too early or too late, and he could fall into the churning water between the ship and the boat, likely to be crushed. He waited for the boat to rise on a swell, then let go, dropping the few feet onto the metal deck. Others followed, 36 men crowding into the small craft. They pressed together, shoulder to shoulder, as the boat filled. The ramp at the front was raised, creating a metal wall between them and their destiny. The boat's engine roared to life, and they began the long, rough journey toward shore. The channel crossing was brutal. The Higgins boat pitched and rolled in the heavy seas, seawater spraying over the sides and drenching everyone. Men vomited from seasickness and fear. The smell was awful, but no one complained. Everyone was focused inward, preparing themselves mentally for what came next. James couldn't see over the ramp, but he could hear the ongoing bombardment, feel the boat shudder as nearby vessels fired their guns. Artillery shells from German shore batteries began falling around them, sending up huge geysers of water. Some landing craft took direct hits and simply vanished, taking all their men with them. "Hold tight!" the Navy coxswain steering the boat shouted. "We're going in!" Through the gaps in the ramp, James could now see the beach approaching. Omaha Beach, though he wouldn't know its name until later. All he could see was sand and obstacles, and the cliffs beyond. Cliffs topped with German bunkers that were very much still operational despite the bombardment. Machine gun fire began striking the boat's ramp with a metallic pinging sound. Bullets whined overhead. Men ducked instinctively, though there was nowhere to go, no cover to be found. They were trapped in a metal box, heading straight into a maelstrom. 30 seconds! The coxswain yelled. Sergeant Patterson moved to the front, preparing to lead them off. "Remember your training. Stay low and keep moving. Don't stop on the beach." 20 seconds! James could feel his heart hammering against his ribs. His mouth was dry, despite the seawater soaking him. His hands gripped his rifle so tightly his knuckles were white. Around him, other men were praying, cursing, crying, or staring with the blank expression of those who had retreated into themselves. 10 seconds! God be with you, boys! The boat's bottom scraped against something, probably one of the underwater obstacles. They were still in deep water, not on the beach proper. But this was as far as the Navy could take them. Go, go, go! The ramp dropped with a metallic clang, and immediately the men at the front were cut down by machine gun fire. Sergeant Patterson took 3 bullets to the chest and fell backward into the boat. Private O'Brien, who'd been right behind him, had the top of his head taken off by machine gun fire. He collapsed instantly, dead, before he knew what hit him. Out! Everyone out! Someone was screaming, though James couldn't tell who through the chaos and noise. He jumped over O'Brien's body and into the water. It was deeper than expected, coming up to his chest. The weight of his equipment tried to drag him under. Machine gun bullets churned the water around him. Men were screaming, dying, drowning under the weight of their gear. James pushed forward, fighting against the water and the current and the bullets. He had to reach the beach, had to get out of this killing zone. Beside him, Tommy Chen was struggling forward, his face set in determination. Behind them, Private Russo was helping Corporal Washington, who'd been hit in the leg. The beach was supposed to be 200 yards away. It looked like 2 miles. Every step was agony, fighting the water and the weight and the terror. James saw a soldier from another unit get hit, his body jerking as multiple bullets found him. He fell face forward into the water and didn't get up. Artillery shells were impacting the beach, throwing up massive explosions of sand and shrapnel. Mortars fell among the landing craft, each explosion potentially catastrophic. The noise was beyond description, beyond anything human beings were meant to endure. It was as if hell itself had opened and was pouring out its fury. James finally felt sand under his feet as the water grew shallower. He was almost to the beach, almost to cover. Just a few more steps. Machine gun fire stitched a line in the water beside him. He dove forward, hitting the sand hard, and began crawling toward a wooden obstacle meant to stop landing craft. Tommy was beside him, breathing hard. Jesus Christ, Sully! Jesus Christ! They'd made it off the boat. But they were still in the kill zone, still completely exposed. The beach was littered with bodies, wounded men crying for medics, destroyed equipment. The Germans had the high ground and were pouring devastating fire down on the beach. This wasn't like training. This was slaughter. "We have to move!" James shouted over the din. "We can't stay here!" But where could they go? The beach offered almost no cover. The seawall was 100 yards ahead, across open sand under direct fire. Men who tried to advance were cut down immediately. Those who stayed were sitting ducks for mortars and artillery. A shell landed 20 feet away, the explosion deafening. James felt shrapnel whistle past his head. When he looked up, Tommy was lying still, blood spreading across the sand beneath him. "Tommy! Tommy!" James crawled to his friend, rolled him over. Tommy's eyes were open, but unfocused. A piece of shrapnel had opened his abdomen, and James could see things that should never be seen. Tommy's hands were trying weakly to hold his guts in, but it was futile. "Sully," Tommy whispered, "tell my dad. Tell him I tried to make him proud." "You did, Tommy. You did make him proud. Now hold on, damn it. Medic, medic!" There were no medics nearby. They were all overwhelmed with casualties, and there were far too many wounded. Tommy's eyes began to glaze over. His breathing became shallow, then stopped. Just like that, the kid from San Francisco who joked and smiled and talked about making his father proud was gone. James wanted to stay with him, wanted to honor his friend's passing, but staying meant dying. The living had to keep fighting, or Tommy's death, O'Brien's death, Patterson's death, and all the others would be meaningless. He grabbed Tommy's dog tags, pulling them free, and stuffed them in his pocket. Then he began crawling forward again, rifle clutched in both hands. Other soldiers were scattered across the beach in various stages of shock and panic. Some were frozen, unable to process what was happening. Others were trying to advance, but pinned down by fire. The plan had fallen apart completely. There was no organization, no command structure, just chaos and death. James reached a small depression in the sand, barely deep enough to provide cover. Another soldier was already there, a kid who looked about 17, tears streaming down his face as he pressed himself into the sand. "I want to go home," the kid was sobbing. "I just want to go home." "We all do," James told him. "But the only way home is forward. Through those Germans up there. You with me?" The kid looked at him with terrified eyes. Then something changed. Some core of steel asserted itself. He nodded. Yeah, I'm with you. What's your name?" "Miller." "Private Henry Miller, from Kansas." "Okay, Miller from Kansas. I'm Sullivan from Boston. Here's what we're going to do. When that next mortar hits, we're going to run for that tank obstacle over there. You see it?" Miller nodded. "On 3, 1, 2, 3. They ran. Machine gun fire tracked them, but somehow missed. They dove behind a massive steel obstacle, catching their breath. From here, they could see other soldiers attempting the same desperate advancement, moving from cover to cover, dying in the attempt or making it through by luck and determination. An officer James didn't recognize, his uniform soaked in seawater and blood, appeared beside them. "You men, we need to get off this beach, find any working equipment and start clearing those obstacles." "Sir, we need to take out those bunkers," James shouted back. "They're slaughtering us." "I know, soldier." "But the engineers are all dead or pinned down. If we don't clear a path for the armor, we're finished." The officer was right. They needed tanks and heavy equipment to have any chance of breaking through the German defenses. But that meant someone had to go back into the killing zone and start clearing obstacles under direct fire. It was a suicide mission. It was also absolutely necessary. "I'll do it, sir," James heard himself say. "Me too," Miller added, his voice steadier now. The officer looked at them with something approaching gratitude. "God bless you both. Grab whatever explosives you can find and start with the nearest obstacles. And boys, make every second count." James and Miller crawled along the beach, searching bodies and abandoned packs for explosives. They found some Bangalore torpedoes and blocks of C2 explosive. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. They began the terrifying work of attaching explosives to the massive steel and wooden obstacles that dotted the beach. Every moment was fraught with death. Machine gun fire kicked up sand around them. Mortars fell with random cruelty. Men died within feet of them, their screams adding to the hellish chorus. But James kept working, kept moving, driven by a determination he didn't know he possessed. He thought of his letter, of his promise to his family. If he was going to die here, it would be while fighting, not while cowering. Miller worked beside him with frantic energy, his earlier terror transformed into desperate purpose. They set charges on 3 obstacles, running the detonation wire back to cover. "Fire in the hole!" James shouted, though he doubted anyone could hear him over the general cacophony. The explosion was satisfying, tearing apart the obstacles and creating a gap. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was progress. The soldiers, seeing what they'd done, began attempting the same thing. Slowly, painfully, the beach defenses were being breached. A tank appeared through the smoke and chaos, one of the amphibious Sherman tanks that was supposed to have landed with them. Most had sunk in the rough seas, but this one had made it. It began firing on the German bunkers, its 75mm guns striking the concrete fortifications. The Germans returned fire, anti-tank rounds seeking the Sherman. One hit glanced off its armor, another dug into the sand beside it. James and Miller ran toward the tank, using it as cover. Other soldiers had the same idea. Within minutes, there were a dozen men clustered behind the armored beast, using it as a mobile shield as they advanced toward the seawall. "Keep moving!" someone was shouting. "Don't bunch up!" They reached the seawall, a 4-foot concrete barrier that offered the first real cover they'd had since leaving the landing craft. Men pressed against it, gasping for breath, trying to process what they'd just survived. But there was no time for reflection. The Germans were still firing from the cliffs above. They needed to assault those positions, or they'd be trapped on the beach forever. A Captain James didn't know appeared, rallying men. "Listen up. We need to breach that wire at the top of the seawall and get to those bunkers. I need volunteers." Every instinct screamed at James to stay down, to stay safe behind the wall. But he thought of Tommy dying in the sand, of O'Brien and Patterson and all the others. Their sacrifice demanded action, not paralysis. "I'll go, sir," James said. "Me too," Miller echoed. 5 other soldiers volunteered. The captain looked at them with respect mixed with sorrow, knowing he was sending them into almost certain death. "Cut through that wire, find a path up the bluff, and signal when it's clear. We'll send the rest through. Godspeed, men." They went over the wall in a rush, sprinting across the exposed ground toward the barbed wire barrier. Immediately, machine gun fire sought them. One soldier fell, then another. James threw himself at the wire, using his wire cutters to snap the thick strands. Beside him, Miller was doing the same. The wire cut slowly, too slowly. Bullets struck the ground around them, ricocheted off rocks. Finally, a gap. James wriggled through, Miller right behind him. 3 of the original 8 volunteers had made it. They were now at the base of the bluff, a steep incline leading up to the German positions. The path was narrow, exposed, and covered by multiple machine gun nests. "We'll never make it up there," one of the soldiers, a corporal named Jenkins, said flatly. "We have to try," James replied. "Everyone on that beach is depending on us." They started climbing, using rocks and scrub brush for handholds. The bluff was perhaps 80 feet high, but every foot was earned in terror. Machine gun fire swept the slope. Grenades came tumbling down. The Germans knew this was the critical moment. If the Americans breached the bluff defenses, the beach would be lost. Jenkins took a burst of machine gun fire halfway up and fell backward, tumbling down the slope. James didn't look back. Couldn't look back. He just kept climbing, his muscles screaming, his lungs burning, his mind focused on the next handhold, the next foothold. A grenade landed near him. He kicked it away instinctively, and it exploded in mid-air, the shrapnel passing harmlessly overhead. Miller gasped something that might have been a prayer or a curse. They were close now, so close to the top. James's hand found the edge of the bluff. He pulled himself up and over, rolling into a crater created by naval bombardment. Miller flopped down beside him, both of them gasping. They'd made it. They were behind the German lines. The machine gun nest that had been firing down on the beach was 15 yards away, its crew focused on targets below. They hadn't noticed James and Miller's ascent. James signaled to Miller, and they moved into position. On 3, they opened fire. The Germans never had a chance to react. 5 men died in seconds, their bodies slumping over their weapon. The machine gun fell silent. James grabbed one of the German stick grenades and threw it toward another nearby position. The explosion brought screams. Below, soldiers on the beach saw the machine gun nest go quiet and immediately began advancing. They'd been given a chance, an opening. They were taking it. Men poured through the gap James and Miller had cut, climbing the bluff, spreading out to assault other positions. The battle was far from over, but the critical moment had passed. The beach was breached. The Germans were being pushed back. Omaha Beach, bought with the blood of thousands of American soldiers, would be held. James collapsed behind the captured machine gun position, his body shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. Miller sat beside him, staring at his hands as if surprised to find them still attached to his body. "We did it," Miller said wonderingly. "Holy shit, Sully, we actually did it." "Yeah," James agreed, thinking of all those who hadn't. Tommy, O'Brien, Patterson, Jenkins, and thousands of others whose names he'd never know. "We did it." The sound of approaching footsteps made them raise their weapons, but it was American soldiers, more men coming up from the beach, expanding the breach. An officer stopped when he saw them. "You two, the ones who took this position?" "Yes, sir," James replied. The officer studied them for a moment. "Good work. Damn good work. Now get ready to move inland. We've got a country to liberate." As the sun finally broke through the clouds, casting golden light on the blood-soaked beach below, James felt the weight of what they'd accomplished and what it had cost. They'd done the impossible. They'd breached Hitler's Atlantic Wall. They'd established a foothold in France. From this beach, American and Allied forces would pour into Europe, beginning the final campaign that would end the war. But victory had come at a terrible price. James looked at the beach below, seeing the bodies floating in the surf, scattered across the sand. Each one had been someone's son, someone's brother, someone's friend. Each one had carried hopes and dreams and a future that would never be realized. The cost of freedom, James thought, was measured in lives, and today that cost had been almost unbearable. He pulled out his letter, miraculously still dry in its waterproof pouch. He'd survived to write another letter home, to tell his family he was alive, but first he had to honor those who hadn't. He pulled out Tommy's dog tags, along with the tags he'd collected from O'Brien and Patterson. He would make sure their families knew they'd died bravely, fighting for something that mattered. Miller was crying silently beside him, the reality of what they'd been through finally hitting him. James put a hand on the younger man's shoulder. "It's okay, let it out. God knows we've earned the right to feel this." "So many dead," Miller whispered. "So many good men." "They didn't die for nothing," James said firmly. "Look." He pointed inland, where more American soldiers were advancing through the French countryside, beginning the liberation. "Every mile we take, every town we free, every life we save from Nazi tyranny. That's what they died for. That's what makes it mean something." As the day wore on, the beachhead was secured and expanded. Supplies began flowing ashore. The wounded were evacuated. The dead were collected and identified when possible. The liberation of Europe had begun, and though the road ahead would be long and bloody, there was now hope where before there had been only darkness. James Michael Sullivan, private first class from Boston, Massachusetts, sat on the bluff above Omaha Beach and watched history unfold. He'd been tested beyond anything he'd imagined possible, and had found within himself reserves of courage and determination he hadn't known existed. He'd lost friends, seen horrors that would haunt his dreams forever, and witnessed both the worst and the best of humanity in a single day. That night, as men dug in for the German counterattack they knew must come, James finally had time to add to his letter home. By candlelight he wrote, "Dear Mom, Dad, and Mary, the letter I wrote yesterday was meant to be goodbye, but by God's grace I'm still alive to write you again. We landed in France this morning. I can't tell you where or give details, but I can tell you we succeeded. We're here, we're holding, and we're going forward. I've seen things today that I'll never be able to fully explain. I've lost friends I'll mourn for the rest of my life. But I've also witnessed incredible bravery, selfless sacrifice, and the indomitable American spirit. We came here as individuals from every corner of our great nation, and we became brothers in the crucible of combat. Many men died today. Heroes, every one of them. They gave everything so that freedom could live. I'm writing this as much for them as for myself, because they can't write their families anymore. Someone needs to bear witness to their courage, to make sure the world remembers what they did here. I'm scared, tired, and changed in ways I'm still processing. But I'm also proud. Proud to wear this uniform, proud to serve beside these men, proud to be part of something larger than myself. Today, we proved that tyranny cannot stand against free people who refuse to surrender their principles. The road ahead is long. The war isn't over. but today we took a step that will echo through history. And I was there. I was part of it. Whatever comes next, I'll face it knowing that we can do the impossible when we stand together. I love you all. I'm going to come home. I promise you that. Your son and brother, James. The second day in France brought new challenges and revelations about the true cost of what they'd achieved. As dawn broke on June 7th, James and the survivors of his unit found themselves dug into hastily prepared defensive positions on the French farmland beyond Omaha Beach. The previous day's chaos had given way to exhaustion and the grim task of reorganization. Units that had been decimated during the landing were being reconstituted. Officers who'd survived were taking command of men they'd never met. The entire command structure was in flux, improvised, and held together by shared purpose rather than formal hierarchy. James had been assigned to a composite squad made up of survivors from various companies. Private Miller from Kansas remained with him, the two men having formed a bond forged in combat. They'd been joined by a tough sergeant from Texas named Rodriguez, a quiet radio man from Wisconsin named Peterson, and several other soldiers whose units had been shattered on the beach. They were strangers, becoming brothers out of necessity. Sergeant Rodriguez, a career soldier with 2 decades of service, gathered them that morning. His weathered face showed the strain of command, but his voice remained steady and authoritative. Listen up. Yesterday we took the beach. Today we hold it and expand inland. The Germans are going to counterattack, probably today, definitely within the next few days. When they come, they're going to hit us hard because they know if they push us back into the sea, this whole invasion fails. He paused, letting that sink in. Every yard of French soil we've gained has been bought with American blood. Our job is to make sure those men didn't die in vain. We hold this ground, period. Clear? Clear, Sergeant, they responded in unison. The landscape of Normandy was nothing like James had imagined. The hedgerows, thick earthen embankments topped with dense vegetation that divided the farmland into small fields, made perfect defensive positions, but also limited visibility and movement. Each field was potentially an ambush site. The German defenders, many of them veterans of the Eastern Front, knew how to use this terrain to deadly effect. As the composite squad moved inland to relieve another unit, they passed through scenes that would have been unimaginable just days before. American supply dumps were being established in fields where French farmers had grown crops for generations. Field hospitals were treating hundreds of wounded in makeshift tents. Engineers were working to clear mines and obstacles, and everywhere there were reminders of the cost, bodies still being collected, destroyed equipment, and the 1,000-yard stares of men who'd seen too much. They relieved a depleted platoon that had been holding a crossroads near the village of Vierzeville-sur-Mer. The men they replaced looked like ghosts, their faces grey with exhaustion and trauma. One of them, a corporal, pulled Rodriguez aside before they left. "Watch the hedgerow to the northeast," the corporal said quietly. "Krauts have a machine gun nest in there somewhere. They let our patrol get close yesterday, then opened up. We lost 5 men before we could pull back. Haven't been able to locate it exactly or knock it out." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Thanks for the heads up, we'll handle it." As they settled into their positions, James realized how vulnerable they were. The crossroads needed to be held because it was a critical junction for moving men and supplies inland. But holding it meant being exposed to German observation and fire from multiple directions. The hedgerows that provided some cover also blocked their view, creating blind spots that the enemy could exploit. "Sully," Miller said quietly as they dug in, "you ever think we're crazy? Coming all the way to France to fight somebody else's war?" James paused his digging and looked at the younger man. "It's not somebody else's war, Miller. It's everybody's war. You've heard about what the Nazis are doing, right? The camps, the mass murders, the plans to enslave entire populations? Yeah, but that's over there, not back home. Today, it's over there. If we'd let Hitler win, how long before it was in America? Evil doesn't stop on its own, kid. It has to be stopped. That's what we're doing here. Miller considered this while continuing to dig. I guess you're right. Still feels pretty damn crazy, though. Most right things do, James agreed. The day passed in tense vigilance. Every sound could be enemy movement. Every shadow could conceal a threat. They took turns on watch, 2 men alert while the others tried to rest. But rest was nearly impossible. The adrenaline from the previous day hadn't fully worn off, and the knowledge that they were in contested territory, surrounded by an enemy that wanted them dead, made sleep elusive. Around midday, German artillery began falling on American positions. The shells came screaming in with terrifying unpredictability, each explosion sending up geysers of dirt and shrapnel. James and his squadmates pressed themselves into their foxholes, hoping the earthen walls would protect them. The barrage lasted 20 minutes that felt like hours. When it finally lifted, they cautiously emerged to assess damage. Peterson's foxhole had taken a direct hit. The radio man was gone, simply erased from existence. His radio, their only reliable communication with higher command, was destroyed. Rodriguez cursed viciously, but kept his composure. We're on our own until we can get a replacement radio. Everyone stays sharp. That afternoon, they got their first real test. German infantry, members of the 352nd Infantry Division, probed their position. The attack came from the northeast, exactly where the relieved corporal had warned about. Machine gun fire erupted from the hedgerow, raking their position. James and Miller returned fire, their M1 Garands barking. The distinctive ping of the Garand's en-bloc clip ejecting after 8 rounds became a rhythmic punctuation to the firefight. The Germans advanced in small groups, using the hedgerows for cover, firing and maneuvering with professional skill. These weren't the dispirited conscripts they'd been told might be defending the beaches. These were experienced soldiers who knew their business. Rodriguez directed their fire with calm precision. Short bursts, don't waste ammunition, target the leaders. The battle lasted perhaps 30 minutes, though time became elastic during combat. James saw several Germans fall to American fire. He also saw 2 of his new squadmates get hit, one killed instantly, the other screaming in agony with a shattered leg. The Germans eventually pulled back, unable to dislodge the Americans, but having tested their defenses and identified their positions. In the aftermath, as they tended to the wounded and reinforced their position, James felt the reality of his new existence settle over him. This was life now. Days or weeks or months of constant vigilance, punctuated by moments of terrifying violence. Sleep when possible, eat when available, fight when necessary, and try not to think about the 1,000 ways he could die before seeing home again. Miller was quiet after the fight, cleaning his rifle with shaking hands. I killed a man today, he said softly. Saw him go down when I fired. He was maybe 20 yards away, and I saw his face when the bullet hit him. I know, James replied. It's not easy. It's not supposed to be easy, but it's necessary. That German would have killed you without hesitation, would have killed me, Rodriguez, all of us. Then he'd have pushed on to kill more Americans. You stopped that. You did your job. Does it get easier? James thought about how to answer honestly. I don't think it does. I don't think it should. The day killing becomes easy is the day we've lost something essential. But you learn to live with it, to accept it as the price of survival and victory. As evening fell, they were joined by a lieutenant who'd been organizing the scattered American forces in the area. He was young, probably no older than James, with a West Point ring on his finger and a map case slung over his shoulder. He studied their position and nodded approvingly. "Good work holding this crossroads, Sergeant," he told Rodriguez. "Command wants us to push forward tomorrow. There's a village about 2 miles inland that we need to secure. Think your men are up for it?" Rodriguez looked at his depleted, exhausted squad. "We're up for whatever needs doing, sir. That's what we came here for." The lieutenant smiled grimly. "That's the spirit. Get your men fed and rested. We jump off at 2600. After he left, Rodriguez gathered the squad. "You heard the man. Tomorrow we attack. That means tonight we prepare. Check your equipment, clean your weapons, get food, and sleep if you can. I won't lie to you. Tomorrow's going to be rough, but we've already done the impossible. We survived Omaha Beach. Everything after that is just details." That night, James wrote another letter home by the light of a carefully shielded candle. Around him other men did the same, or cleaned weapons, or simply stared into the darkness with exhausted eyes. "Dear Mom, Dad, and Mary, second night in France. We're moving inland tomorrow, pushing deeper into enemy territory. I can't give details about where or what, but I can tell you we're making progress. Every mile we take is 1 mile closer to ending this war. I've learned something about myself these past 2 days. I'm stronger than I knew, braver than I believed. When everything falls apart and death is all around, I've found that I can still function, still fight, still do what needs doing. I don't know where that strength comes from. Maybe from you, from the values you raised me with, from knowing that you're praying for me back home. I've made new friends here, good men from all over America. We look out for each other, fight for each other. That's what gets us through, not the grand strategies or the political speeches, but the simple fact that the man beside you is depending on you, and you won't let him down. I miss you all terribly. Miss Mom's cooking and Dad's advice and Mary's laughter. Miss the way our house smells in the morning when Mom makes coffee. Miss walking through Boston Common and watching the ships in the harbor. Miss everything about the life I took for granted before I understood how precious it all is. But I'm exactly where I need to be, doing exactly what needs to be done. I'm helping to free a continent from tyranny. I'm part of something bigger and more important than myself. That knowledge sustains me through the fear and exhaustion and horror. Take care of each other, keep me in your prayers, and know that every day in every action, I'm trying to live up to the man you raised me to be. All my love, James." He folded the letter carefully and added it to the others he'd written. He'd mail them all when he got the chance, assuming he survived to do so. The letter was becoming less of a goodbye message and more of a journal, a record of his experiences and thoughts. Maybe someday, long after this war was over, he'd read them again and remember what it felt like to be here, to be part of this moment in history. Before trying to sleep, James checked his equipment one final time. His rifle was clean and loaded. His ammunition pouches held 96 rounds in 12 clips. His canteen was full. His first aid kit was intact. His dog tags hung around his neck, cold metal against his skin, ready to identify his body if the worst happened. And in his inner pocket, close to his heart, he carried 3 things: the photograph of his family, Tommy Chen's dog tags, and his letters home, his connections to who he was and why he fought. As he lay in his foxhole, wrapped in a thin blanket, staring up at stars that seemed impossibly bright and clear, James thought about tomorrow's attack. More men would die. Maybe Miller, maybe Rodriguez, maybe himself. But they would push forward because that's what American soldiers did. They didn't quit. They didn't surrender. They paid the price for freedom, whatever that price might be. Sleep came eventually, troubled by dreams of surf and sand and faces of friends who would never go home. But when Rodriguez woke him for his watch shift at 0200, James was ready, alert, prepared to do his duty. That's all any of them could do. Their duty, 1 day, 1 hour, 1 moment at a time, until this terrible war was finally won. The attack began at dawn, and within the first hour, James understood why veterans spoke of war with haunted eyes. The advance through the Norman hedgerows was nothing like the training exercises back in England. Every field was a potential killing ground. Every hedge concealed possible death. The Germans had transformed this peaceful farmland into a deadly maze, and American blood was the price of passage through it. The composite squad moved as part of a larger force, perhaps 200 men, spread across a half-mile front, all advancing toward the village of Formigny. The plan was simple. Push the Germans back, secure the village, establish defensive positions, and hold against counterattack. But simplicity in planning meant complexity and chaos in execution. James moved in a crouch, his rifle at the ready, Miller close behind him. Rodriguez led from the front, as all good sergeants did, navigating the hedgerows with the instincts of a man who'd survived too many battles to take unnecessary risks. They'd advance to a hedgerow, pause while scouts checked the next field, then rush across the open ground to the next position. It was exhausting, nerve-wracking work, made worse by the knowledge that German observers could see them from church steeples and hilltops, directing artillery and mortar fire onto American positions. The first casualty came 30 minutes into the advance. A private named Henderson stepped on a mine hidden in the gateway through a hedgerow. The explosion was devastating. Henderson died instantly, his body torn apart. 2 other soldiers near him were wounded by shrapnel. The advance halted while medics worked on the wounded and engineers checked for more mines. "Stay alert," Rodriguez warned unnecessarily. Everyone was already operating at maximum vigilance, adrenaline overwhelming exhaustion. They pushed forward again, more cautiously now, watching for any sign of mines or booby traps. The Germans were masters of improvisation, turning everyday objects into death traps. A discarded helmet might be rigged with explosives. A dead body could be booby-trapped. Even the hedgerows themselves might conceal tripwires connected to hidden charges. Around mid-morning they encountered serious resistance. As James's squad approached a particularly thick hedgerow, machine gun fire erupted from a concealed position. The distinctive sound of a German MG-42, nicknamed Hitler's buzzsaw for its incredibly high rate of fire, filled the air. Bullets chewed through the vegetation, forcing the Americans to dive for cover. "Suppressive fire!" Rodriguez shouted. "Keep their heads down!" James and Miller, along with several other riflemen, began firing at the source of the machine gun, hoping to pin the German crew while others maneuvered for a better position. But the Germans had chosen their spot well. They were dug into the base of the hedgerow with clear fields of fire and excellent protection. Direct assault would be suicide. "We need armor!" someone yelled. "Where's our tank support?" But the tanks couldn't navigate the narrow farm lanes and were being held in reserve for the final push into the village. The squad was on its own. Rodriguez made a quick decision. "Sullivan, Miller, work your way around the left flank. See if you can get an angle on that position. Rest of you, keep up the fire. Don't let them relocate." James and Miller began a careful crawl along the hedgerow, using the thick vegetation as cover. It was slow, dangerous work. The MG-42 continued firing in controlled bursts, its crew clearly experienced and disciplined. German rifles added to the defensive fire, picking at any American who showed himself. It took 15 minutes to work around to a position where they could see the German machine gun nest from an angle. 2 soldiers in coal scuttle helmets were operating the weapon, while 2 more provided security and fed ammunition. They were professionals, rotating duties, maintaining their rate of fire, completely unaware that James and Miller had flanked them. James signaled his intentions to Miller, who nodded, understanding. On James's signal, they both opened fire. The range was less than 50 yards. The Germans never had a chance to react. All four went down in seconds. The MG-42 fell silent. "Position clear," James shouted. The squad advanced quickly, securing the machine gun position before any German reinforcements could arrive. They'd eliminated a significant obstacle, but the cost had been another 2 men wounded in the firefight. The squad that had started the day with 12 men was down to 8 effectives. They pressed on, the village of Formigny growing closer with each hard-won field. By early afternoon, they could see the church steeple rising above the hedgerows. American artillery had been pounding the village for hours, trying to drive out or kill the German defenders. Smoke rose from several buildings. The sound of ongoing combat, rifle fire, explosions, shouted orders in multiple languages created a hellish symphony. The final approach to the village required crossing 200 yards of open ground, former pasture land that offered almost no cover. Rodriguez studied the terrain grimly. "This is going to hurt," he said simply. "But it's the only way in. When I give the word, we go fast, and we don't stop. Spread out, keep intervals, and pray the German artillery observers are looking somewhere else." They lined up along the hedgerow, 8 men preparing to cross a killing ground. James checked his rifle one more time, made sure his ammunition pouches were secure, and thought briefly of home. If he died in the next few minutes, would his family ever know exactly where and how? Would his letters reach them? Would they understand why he'd come here, why this mattered enough to risk everything? "Go, go, go!" They ran. James's legs pumped, carrying him across the open ground as fast as his equipment-laden body could move. German fire erupted immediately, machine guns, rifles, mortars all seeking them. The earth erupted in small explosions. Bullets cracked through the air. Men fell. James kept running. 50 yards, 100. Miller was beside him, gasping for breath but keeping pace. Rodriguez was ahead, somehow still leading despite being the oldest and most burdened with equipment. The village was close now, so close. A mortar landed 15 feet away, the blast wave slamming into James like a physical blow. He stumbled, but kept his feet, kept moving. His ears rang, blood ran from his nose, but he was still alive, still functional. They reached the first buildings of Formigny and dove behind a stone wall, gasping for breath. Of the 8 men who'd started the run, 6 had made it. 2 more casualties, 2 more families who would receive telegrams. The fighting in the village was house to house, room to room, brutal and personal. The Germans had barricaded many buildings, turning them into miniature fortresses. Each one had to be cleared, often with grenades and close quarters shooting. James found himself learning urban combat through trial and error, each mistake potentially fatal. They cleared a house by throwing grenades through the windows, then rushing in while the defenders were stunned. 3 German soldiers died in that house, shot by American rifles at ranges of less than 10 feet. There was no glory in it, no heroism, just necessary violence done quickly and efficiently. By late afternoon, after hours of fighting, Formigny was in American hands. The Germans had withdrawn to new positions further inland, leaving behind their dead and abandoned equipment. The village, once home to perhaps 300 French civilians, was now a shattered ruin, nearly every building damaged by artillery or fighting. James sat on the steps of the partially destroyed church, too tired to move further. Around him, other soldiers did the same, their faces blank with exhaustion. They'd won. They'd taken the objective, but the cost had been high, and everyone knew this was just one village among thousands, one battle among hundreds still to be fought. Rodriguez appeared, his uniform torn and blood-stained, though apparently none of it his own. "Good work today, Sullivan. You and Miller showed real initiative with that machine gun nest." "Thank you, Sergeant. Get some rest. We're holding here tonight, but tomorrow we push on. This war's not going to win itself." As darkness fell over Formigny, James found a partially intact house to shelter in. French civilians began emerging from cellars where they'd hidden during the fighting, their faces showing a mixture of relief, grief, and uncertainty. An elderly woman approached James, speaking rapid French he couldn't understand. But her meaning was clear when she pressed a piece of bread into his hands and touched his cheek gently, tears running down her face. "Merci," she kept saying. "Merci, merci." James accepted the bread, though he felt unworthy of her gratitude. He was just a soldier doing his job, but to her, to these French civilians who'd lived under Nazi occupation for 4 years, he and his fellow Americans represented liberation, hope, and freedom restored. That night, James added to his ongoing letter home, "We took a village today. I won't write its name, but it's ours now. French people came out when the fighting stopped, and they looked at us like we were heroes. I don't feel like a hero. I feel tired and scared and sad for all the men who didn't make it this far, but maybe that's what heroism really is. Not the absence of fear, but doing what's right despite being afraid. Not feeling invincible, but fighting anyway because the cause is just. Not seeking glory, but accepting the burden of duty. I think of Tommy Chen often. He should be here to see this, to see French people free again. All the men who died on the beach, in the fields, in the village today, they should be here to see what their sacrifice achieved. I carry them with me, their memories and their dog tags. I fight for them now as much as for myself. Tomorrow we go on, always forward, until this war is won and we can all come home. I'm still alive, still fighting, still believing that what we're doing matters. That has to be enough. The days that followed Formigny blurred together into a continuous cycle of advance, combat, exhaustion, and brief rest before advancing again. The liberation of France was not a single grand battle, but thousands of small engagements, each one deadly serious to those involved, each one necessary for overall victory. James's squad, or what remained of it, became part of a larger push toward the strategically important city of Saint-Lô. The Germans were fighting for every inch of ground, knowing that losing Normandy meant losing France, and losing France meant the war was effectively over. They deployed their best remaining units, including Waffen-SS divisions and panzer units, to contain and, if possible, destroy the American beachhead. The fighting intensified. American casualties mounted. Fresh troops arriving from England quickly became veterans or casualties, sometimes within hours of reaching the front. The hedgerow country that had seemed quaint and pastoral from aerial photographs proved to be a defender's paradise and an attacker's nightmare. James learned to sleep anywhere, anytime, for however long possible. 5 minutes of rest was precious. An hour was luxury. A full night's sleep became a distant memory. He learned to eat cold rations without tasting them, to function on adrenaline and determination when his body screamed for rest. He learned which sounds meant incoming artillery and which meant it was passing overhead. He learned to identify German and American aircraft by their engine sounds. He learned 100 small lessons that might mean the difference between life and death. Miller stayed close, the younger man having adopted James as a sort of protective figure. They looked out for each other, sharing rations, taking turns on watch, covering each other in combat. The bond between them had grown stronger than family ties. They were brothers in every way that mattered, bound by shared trauma and mutual dependence. Sergeant Rodriguez continued to lead them with a mixture of stern discipline and genuine care. He was the kind of NCO that armies are built on, competent, courageous, and committed to bringing his men through alive, if at all possible. Under his leadership, their composite squad developed into a cohesive fighting unit, despite the constant turnover as men were killed or wounded and replacements arrived. In mid-June, they participated in a major attack towards Saint-Lô. The objective was to break through German lines and open the road to the city. Intelligence suggested the Germans were weakening, that one more push might crack their defenses. Intelligence was wrong. The attack began with a massive artillery barrage, hundreds of American guns pounding German positions. Then the infantry advanced, with James's unit among the lead elements. For the first hour, progress was good. They overran lightly held forward positions and pushed deep into German-held territory. Then they hit the main German defensive line, and hell opened up. Artillery, mortars, machine guns, and direct fire from concealed anti-tank guns savaged the American advance. Men fell by the dozens, then by the hundreds. Units became disorganized. Command and control broke down. The attack stalled, then began to fall back under the weight of German fire. James found himself in a crater with Miller, Rodriguez, and 3 other soldiers, pinned down by interlocking machine gun fire from multiple directions. German artillery walked back and forth across their position, each shell a potential death sentence. They were cut off from the main American force, surrounded by dead and dying soldiers, with German infantry beginning to move forward to finish them off. "We need to fall back," one of the soldiers shouted, panic clear in his voice. "Fall back where?" Rodriguez replied harshly. "They're behind us too. We're surrounded." The reality of their situation settled over them. They were trapped in no man's land, cut off from friendly forces, with limited ammunition and no way to call for support. This might be where it ended. This might be the place where James Michael Sullivan's war and life came to a close. James thought of his letters home, probably still in his pack somewhere in the chaos. He thought of his family, of Boston, of everything he'd never get to see or do if he died here. He thought of Tommy Chen and all the others who'd already fallen. Was this how it felt for them in their final moments? This mixture of fear and resignation and bitter regret for a life cut short? "Listen," Rodriguez said, his voice cutting through James's dark thoughts. "We're not dead yet. We've got ammunition, we've got each other, and we've got the guts to fight our way out of this. Here's what we're going to do." He laid out a desperate plan. They'd wait for the next artillery barrage, then use the smoke and confusion to break out of the crater and fight their way back to American lines. It was barely a plan at all, more of a prayer wrapped in action. But it was better than waiting to be killed or captured. "I'm not going to some German POW camp," one soldier said. "I'm going home, or I'm dying trying." "That's the spirit," Rodriguez said. "We stick together, move fast, and don't stop for anything. Sullivan, you and Miller take point. You've got good instincts. Trust them." They prepared themselves mentally and physically for what might be their last action. James checked his rifle, fixed his bayonet, and said a quick prayer. Beside him, Miller was doing the same, his young face set with determination that had replaced his earlier fear. The artillery barrage came, German shells falling on what they thought were American positions. The ground shook, smoke and dust filled the air. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. "Now, move!" They exploded out of the crater, running blindly through the smoke. German soldiers appeared as shadows in the murk. James fired without aiming, working his rifle's action frantically, the Garand bucking against his shoulder. Miller was beside him, also firing. Rodriguez emptied his Thompson submachine gun in controlled bursts. They burst through the German line into open ground. Behind them, shouts in German and the sound of pursuit. Ahead, hopefully, American lines. They ran like men possessed, legs pumping, lungs burning, survival the only thought. Machine gun fire tracked them, but the smoke and chaos made accurate shooting impossible. One of their group went down, shot through the back. They couldn't stop to help him. Stopping meant dying. American voices ahead. They'd made it. James shouted the day's password as they approached, praying the men ahead wouldn't shoot first and ask questions later. "Don't shoot! Americans coming in! Don't shoot!" They stumbled into an American foxhole position, collapsing from exhaustion and relief. They'd made it. Against all odds, they'd survived. An officer appeared, surveying them with a mixture of relief and frustration. "Where the hell is the rest of your unit?" "Gone, sir," Rodriguez reported, his voice flat. "We're all that's left." The officer's expression softened. "Get to the aid station, get checked out, then report for reassignment. Good work making it back." As they walked toward the rear areas, the scale of the day's disaster became apparent. The attack had failed catastrophically. Hundreds of Americans had been killed or wounded. Multiple units had been effectively destroyed. The German line held firm. St. Lo remained in enemy hands. That night, as medics checked him over and declared him fit for duty despite minor shrapnel wounds he hadn't even noticed receiving, James tried to process what had happened. They'd been beaten. Soundly, completely beaten. The vaunted American military had thrown everything at the Germans and been thrown back. But as he looked around at the other survivors, as he saw new units arriving to replace the shattered ones, as he watched supplies flowing forward and leaders already planning the next attack, James realized something important. They'd lost this battle, but they hadn't lost the war. Americans didn't quit. They'd regroup, learn from their mistakes, and attack again. And again. And again, until finally the German line broke and the road to St. Lo and beyond opened up. Miller found him later, carrying 2 cans of rations he'd scrounged. "Thought you might be hungry." "Thanks, kid." James opened the can mechanically, spooning the cold beans into his mouth without tasting them. "Sully, I thought we were dead back there, really dead." "So did I. But we made it. We actually made it." James looked at the younger man, seeing the mixture of relief and residual fear in his eyes. "Yeah, we made it. And tomorrow, or the day after, or the day after that, we'll do it all again. Because that's what soldiers do. We keep fighting until the job's done." "Is it always going to be like this hard?" James considered lying, offering false comfort. But Miller deserved honesty. "Probably, maybe worse, but we'll get through it, together." They sat in companionable silence, 2 soldiers among thousands, eating their cold rations and trying not to think about tomorrow. Around them, the American war machine continued its inexorable work. Wounded were evacuated. Supplies moved forward. Units reorganized. Plans were made. The setback was noted, analyzed, and incorporated into future operations. That night, James wrote what might have been his most honest letter yet. "Dear Mom, Dad, and Mary, today we lost. I need to be honest about that. We attacked with everything we had, and the Germans threw us back. Good men died, and we gained nothing. It's hard not to feel like their deaths were wasted, like we failed them. But here's what I'm learning about war. It's not like the movies or the newsreels. It's not a series of glorious victories leading inevitably to triumph. It's hard, grinding work. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Sometimes 1 step forward, 2 steps back. You lose battles. You lose friends. You lose pieces of yourself. But you don't lose the war unless you quit. And Americans don't quit. Tomorrow we'll regroup. Next week we'll attack again. Maybe we'll lose again. Maybe we'll break through. But we'll keep trying until we win, because the alternative is unthinkable. If we give up, if we go home, then Hitler wins. Evil wins. And all those men who've already died will have died for nothing. I'm tired, Mom. Tired in ways I never knew were possible. Tired in my bones, in my soul. I've seen things that will haunt me forever. I've done things I never imagined I'd have to do. But I'm not giving up. I can't. Too many people are counting on us. The French people living under Nazi rule. The prisoners in concentration camps. The millions who will suffer if we don't win this war. Dad, You told me once that the measure of a man isn't whether he falls, but whether he gets back up. I've fallen today. We've all fallen. But tomorrow we'll get back up. That's what Americans do. That's who we are. Mary, I hope you never have to face anything as hard as this. I hope you grow up in a world where wars like this are distant memories, where people solve their problems with words instead of bullets. That's the world I'm fighting to create, a world where little girls can grow up safe and free. I love you all. I'm still here, still fighting. That's all I can promise, that I'll keep fighting until this is done. Your son and brother James. The weeks following the failed attack on St. Lo tested every American soldier in Normandy. The weather turned miserable, with constant rain turning the Norman soil into thick mud that clung to everything. The hedgerows that had been difficult to fight through became nearly impassable. Vehicles bogged down, supply lines struggled, and all the while the Germans continued to resist with fanatical determination. James's unit, reconstituted yet again with fresh replacements, found themselves in a sector near the village of La Haye-du-Puy. Their mission was to hold a section of the line and patrol aggressively, gathering intelligence about German positions and intentions. It was dangerous, exhausting work that lacked the drama of major attacks, but was every bit as deadly. The replacements who joined them were green, some so young they looked like they should still be in high school. James and Miller, veterans of barely 6 weeks of combat, were suddenly the experienced ones, tasked with keeping these kids alive long enough to learn the basics of survival. One replacement, Private Eddie Kowalski from Pittsburgh, reminded James painfully of Tommy Chen. Same age, same eagerness, same optimism that hadn't yet been crushed by reality. James took Kowalski under his wing, teaching him the 100 small lessons that meant the difference between life and death. Stay low, move fast, watch the ground for mines and trip wires, James instructed during a patrol. Don't bunch up. One mortar can kill a whole group if you're clustered. Don't touch anything that looks out of place. Don't assume a position is clear until you've physically checked it. And most important, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Kowalski absorbed it all with wide-eyed attention. How do you stay so calm, Sully? Aren't you scared? Terrified every minute of every day, James admitted, but you can't let fear paralyze you. You acknowledge it, then you do your job anyway. The patrols revealed that the Germans were preparing for something big. Prisoners taken during skirmishes spoke of massive reinforcements arriving, of plans for a major counter-offensive to drive the Americans back into the sea. Intelligence officers debriefed James and others extensively, trying to piece together German intentions from fragments of information. In late June, the nature of the fighting changed. American forces launched Operation Cobra, a massive offensive designed to break out of the Normandy hedgerows and into open country where American mobility and firepower could be fully utilized. It began with a devastating aerial bombardment, with thousands of Allied bombers pounding German positions. James's unit watched from their positions as wave after wave of bombers flew overhead, their bomb bays opening to release deadly cargo onto German fortifications. The ground shook continuously, the sky filled with smoke and dust. It was awesome and terrible, a display of industrial warfare's destructive power. Jesus Christ, Kowalski whispered. How could anything survive that? The Germans are tough, Rodriguez replied grimly. Don't underestimate them. And when the bombing ended and the infantry advanced, they discovered Rodriguez was right. Despite the massive bombardment, German resistance remained fierce. But this time, the American attack had sufficient weight and momentum to crack the German line. Breakthrough came suddenly in the American sector, and orders came down to exploit it aggressively. "This is it!" officers shouted as units prepared to advance. "This is our chance to break out. Don't stop. Don't slow down. Keep pushing. James's unit joined the flood of American forces pouring through the gap in German lines. For the first time since landing in Normandy, they were moving fast, covering miles instead of yards. German forces, their positions turned by the breakthrough, began retreating in disorder. The hunters had become the hunted. The advance was chaotic and exhilarating. They bypassed German strongpoints that would have required days to reduce, leaving them for follow-on forces. They liberated French towns, whose residents poured into the streets, throwing flowers and offering wine despite having nearly nothing themselves. They captured German supply dumps and equipment parks, proof that the Wehrmacht's defensive line had truly collapsed. But liberation came with its own horrors. In one town, they discovered evidence of SS reprisals against French civilians suspected of aiding the resistance. Bodies in a church, including women and children, massacred in retribution. The sight hardened something in James. This was why they fought. This was the evil that had to be defeated, whatever the cost. Kowalski vomited when he saw the bodies, his youthful optimism finally meeting reality's harsh truth. James put a hand on his shoulder. Remember this. Remember what we're fighting against. These people did nothing wrong except love freedom. The SS murdered them as casually as you'd swat a fly. This is what Nazi rule looks like. How can human beings do this? Kowalski asked, tears streaming down his face. I don't know, but I know we have to stop them from doing it again. The rapid advance continued through July and into August. American armored columns raced across France, liberating town after town. The German army in Normandy was collapsing, trapped in a pocket near the town of Falaise. Allied aircraft savaged the retreating Germans, turning the roads into charnel houses of destroyed vehicles and dead soldiers. James's infantry unit followed behind the armor, mopping up bypassed German positions and securing the liberated territory. It was still dangerous work. Desperate German soldiers often fought with suicidal ferocity rather than surrender, but the momentum had clearly shifted. The Americans were winning. In mid-August, they participated in closing the Falaise pocket, trapping tens of thousands of German soldiers. The fighting was intense as the Germans attempted to break out and the Allies tried to seal the pocket completely. James saw combat on a scale that dwarfed even Omaha Beach. Thousands of men engaged in desperate close-quarters fighting, the roads littered with destroyed equipment and corpses. When the pocket finally closed, the destruction was biblical. Miles of German vehicles, artillery, tanks and equipment destroyed or abandoned. Bodies everywhere. German soldiers who'd fought to the end or been caught by Allied aircraft and artillery. The smell was indescribable, a mixture of death, burning metal and diesel fuel that seemed to permeate everything. This is what defeat looks like, Rodriguez said, surveying the devastation. The Germans are finished in France. They just don't know it yet. But the Germans weren't finished fighting. As August progressed, James's unit pushed toward Paris. Intelligence reported that the German garrison in the city, under orders from Hitler himself, was preparing to destroy Paris rather than let it be liberated intact. The race was on to reach the city before the demolitions could be executed. The liberation of Paris in late August was unlike anything James had experienced. As American and Free French forces entered the city, Parisians emerged from hiding by the tens of thousands, creating a celebration that was equal parts joy, relief, and catharsis. 4 years of occupation ended in a single day. The Germans surrendered or fled. The tricolor flew again over Paris. James and his unit marched through streets lined with cheering crowds. Women kissed them, men offered wine and cigarettes, children clung to their uniforms. An elderly man grabbed James's hand and wept, thanking him in broken English for returning France to the French. It was overwhelming, intoxicating, and deeply meaningful. This was what they'd fought for. This moment of liberation, of freedom restored, of tyranny defeated. For the first time since landing in Normandy, James felt that the terrible cost might actually be worth it. That night, as his unit bivouacked in a Paris park, James wrote home with genuine optimism. "Dear Mom, Dad, and Mary, we've liberated Paris. I'm writing this from the most beautiful city in the world, surrounded by people who are free for the first time in 4 years. It's incredible, overwhelming, and deeply moving. Today I understood why we came here. Seeing French families reunited, seeing people able to speak freely and walk without fear, seeing children playing in the streets without German soldiers watching. This is what we've been fighting for. This makes the losses, the fear, the exhaustion, all worth it. The war isn't over. We're going to push into Germany itself, and that will probably be the hardest fighting yet. But for the first time, I can actually see the end. I can imagine coming home, not as a distant fantasy, but as a real possibility. We're winning, Mum. We're actually going to win this war. I've changed so much since I left Boston. I'm not the boy who enlisted full of patriotic enthusiasm. I've seen too much, done too much, lost too many friends, but I'm not bitter or broken. I'm stronger. I've learned what I'm capable of when pushed to the absolute limit. I've learned the value of freedom and the price it demands. I've learned what it means to be part of something larger than myself. When I come home, and I will come home, I'll be different. I hope you can accept the man I've become. I hope I can find a way to fit back into normal life after everything I've experienced. But mostly, I hope I can make you proud, not just of what I did here, but of who I am because of it. Paris is free. France is almost free. Soon, all of Europe will be free. And then, God willing, I'll come home to Boston and never take a single day of peace for granted again. All my love, James." As September arrived, the American advance continued eastward toward Germany. The easy victories of August gave way to harder fighting as German forces, now defending their homeland, stiffened their resistance. Supply lines stretched thin as the rapid advance outran the ability to keep units fed and fueled. The weather worsened as autumn approached. James's unit found themselves part of a push toward the German border, part of a broad offensive all along the Western Front. The German retreat had ended. Now came the hard work of breaking through prepared defenses on German soil itself. In early September, they crossed from France into Belgium, liberating towns that had suffered under German occupation since 1940. The reception was similar to France. Grateful civilians, celebrations, tears of joy and relief. But the combat grew fiercer. The Germans were giving ground grudgingly now, making the Allies pay for every mile. Near the Belgian-German border, James's unit participated in an assault on a German fortification system, part of the Siegfried Line that Hitler had constructed in the 1930s. The bunkers were formidable, thick concrete structures with interlocking fields of fire, proof against all but the heaviest weapons. Taking them required coordinated infantry armor artillery attacks, with heavy casualties almost guaranteed. The assault began at dawn on a cold, rainy September morning. Artillery pounded the bunkers for 2 hours, then tanks moved forward to provide direct fire support while infantry advanced. James found himself once again running across open ground into enemy fire, his rifle clutched in white-knuckled hands, his heart hammering against his ribs. The bunker they were assaulting seemed impervious to everything thrown at it. Shells bounced off the thick concrete. Machine gun fire from its firing slits cut down Americans with mechanical efficiency. The attack stalled, then began to fall back under the weight of defensive fire. "We need a satchel charge," Rodriguez shouted. "Get explosives on that bunker or we'll never take it." Carrying a satchel charge, a bag full of explosives, up to a bunker was essentially a death sentence. The Germans would concentrate all their fire on anyone attempting it, but someone had to try. James saw Kowalski reaching for a satchel charge. "No," James said firmly, putting his hand on the younger man's shoulder. "I'll do it. You've got your whole life ahead of you. Sully, you don't have to—" "Yeah, I do. Cover me." James grabbed the heavy satchel, took 3 deep breaths, then sprinted toward the bunker. Time seemed to slow. He saw muzzle flashes from the firing slit, heard bullets crack past his head, felt one tug at his sleeve. His legs pumped mechanically, carrying him forward through sheer will. 50 yards, 40, 30. He was going to make it. He might actually make it. 20 yards, 10. He dove the last few feet, slamming against the bunker's wall, the one spot where the Germans inside couldn't bring their weapons to bear. His hands shook as he pulled the fuse igniter, activating the charge's timer. 15 seconds. He had 15 seconds to get clear. He ran, not back toward American lines, but parallel to the bunker, trying to get out of the blast radius. Behind him, he heard German soldiers inside the bunker shouting, realizing what was happening. The explosion was massive, the satchel charge detonating inside the bunker's firing slit where James had shoved it at the last second. The concrete structure shuddered, but held, but the explosion inside killed everyone within. The bunker fell silent. American soldiers poured forward, using the destroyed bunker as a foothold to assault the rest of the position. By early afternoon, the entire fortification complex was in American hands. The Siegfried Line had been breached, but the cost had been high. Of the 30 men in James's unit who'd started the assault, only 18 remained effective. The others were dead or wounded. And this was just one bunker complex among hundreds, just one small section of a defensive line that stretched for hundreds of miles. That evening, as medics treated the wounded and Graves registration personnel handled the dead, an officer approached James. It was a colonel, his uniform marking him as someone from division headquarters. "Private First Class Sullivan?" "Yes, sir." James struggled to his feet, his body aching from the day's exertions. "I've been hearing about what you did today. Your sergeant tells me you volunteered to take out that bunker when nobody else would." "That took real courage, son." "I was just doing my job, sir." "Well, you did it damn well. I'm recommending you for the Silver Star. You've also been promoted to corporal, effective immediately." "Thank you, sir, but I was just—" "I know, just doing your job. That's what all the real heroes say." The colonel shook James's hand firmly. "Keep up the good work, Corporal. The Army needs more men like you." After the officer left, Miller approached with a grin. "Corporal Sullivan has a nice ring to it. It's just a title, kid. It's more than that. It's recognition. You earned it." James looked at the younger man, seeing how much Miller had changed since that terrified private who'd landed at Omaha Beach. They'd both changed, aged years in a matter of months. "We all earn it. Every day we survive this." "Think we'll make it? All the way to Berlin, all the way home?" "I don't know," James answered honestly, "but I'm going to keep trying. That's all any of us can do." As autumn deepened and the Allied advance slowed, facing increasingly stubborn German resistance, James settled into a routine that would carry him through the months ahead. Fight when ordered, rest when possible, look after his men, and maintain the faith that they were on the right side of history, fighting the right fight, paying the price that freedom demanded. He continued writing letters home, though now with more hope than before. Paris had shown him that victory was possible, that the sacrifices were achieving something real. Germany was next. Then, God willing, home. But first, there was still so much fighting to be done. If you've been following James's journey and found this story meaningful, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us continue sharing these important stories of courage and sacrifice. The autumn of 1944 brought a different kind of warfare to James and his fellow soldiers. Gone were the rapid advances and dramatic liberations of August and September. In their place came a grinding slog through increasingly determined German resistance, brutal weather, and supply shortages that left American forces stretched thin and vulnerable. James's unit, now part of the push toward the Rhine River and Germany's industrial heartland, found themselves engaged in nearly constant combat. The Germans, fighting now on their own soil with their backs to the wall, displayed a ferocity born of desperation. Every town, every crossroads, every bridge became a contested battleground. Corporal Sullivan, James was still getting used to his new rank, now had direct responsibility for a squad of 8 men. Most were replacements who'd arrived in the weeks after Paris, young soldiers who'd missed the bloodbath of Normandy, but were getting their own brutal education in the realities of combat. James did his best to keep them alive while teaching them how to fight. "Stay alert, stay together and trust each other," he told them repeatedly. "We're all that stands between each other and death. Don't let your buddies down." Private Eddie Kowalski had become James's unofficial second-in-command, the kid from Pittsburgh having survived long enough to learn the lessons of survival. He watched over the newer replacements with the same protective instinct James had shown him, the cycle of mentorship continuing. Miller was still there too, now a PFC himself, still the Kansas farm boy who'd become James's closest friend in this hellish war. They'd been through too much together to be separated now, 2 survivors bound by shared trauma and mutual trust. In October, the unit participated in the brutal urban combat in the German city of Aachen, the first major German city to fall to the Allies. The fighting was house to house, room to room, sometimes hand to hand. The Germans defended fanatically, each building a miniature fortress that had to be cleared with grenades, flamethrowers, and point-blank gunfire. James led his squad through the rubble-strewn streets, each corner a potential ambush, each building a possible death trap. They cleared houses using the hard-earned techniques of urban warfare, throw grenades through windows, rush in while defenders are stunned, shoot anything that moves, then move to the next house and repeat. In one house, they encountered a group of elderly German men armed with antiquated rifles, part of the Volkssturm militia Hitler had conscripted from Germany's last reserves of manpower. They were grandfathers, men in their 60s and 70s, pressed into service to defend a regime most of them probably privately despised. "Surrender!" James shouted in the few German words he'd learned. "Hands up! Hände hoch!" The old men looked at each other, then slowly raised their hands. James felt a wave of relief. He didn't want to kill these grandfathers, but in the next house they encountered fanatic SS troops who fought to the death rather than surrender. There was no predicting what kind of enemy waited behind each door. The battle for Aachen lasted weeks and cost thousands of American casualties. When it finally ended in late October, the city was little more than ruins, its civilian population displaced or sheltering in cellars, its infrastructure destroyed. James stood in what had once been the city center and tried to imagine what it had looked like before the war. Beautiful, probably. Historic. Now just more rubble and destruction. Is it worth it? One of the newer soldiers, Private Davis from Tennessee, asked James as they surveyed the devastation. All this destruction, all these deaths, is defeating Hitler worth destroying entire cities? James thought carefully before answering. Yes. Because if we don't destroy Hitler, he'll destroy far more than cities. He'll destroy freedom, destroy entire peoples. Look what he did to the Jews, to Poland, to anyone who opposed him. This destruction is terrible, but it's necessary. Sometimes you have to destroy evil completely, even at great cost. I guess you're right. Just seems like such a waste. War is always a waste, but some things are worth fighting for, even when it means waste and destruction. As November arrived, bringing cold rain and early snow, James's unit moved into positions along the Siegfried Line for what everyone assumed would be a static winter defensive. The supplies to continue offensive operations hadn't materialized. The long supply lines from Normandy simply couldn't keep enough fuel, ammunition, and food flowing to sustain major attacks. So the American advance stalled, and both sides dug in for what promised to be a miserable winter. James's squad found themselves occupying a section of the line near the Hurtgen Forest, a dark, forbidding stretch of forest along the Belgian-German border. Intelligence insisted the forest needed to be cleared of German forces to protect the flank of future operations. What followed was one of the most brutal and futile battles of the entire war. The Hurtgen forest fighting was a nightmare. Dense trees prevented air support and made artillery less effective. The Germans had fortified every position, created elaborate bunker systems, and mined every trail and road. The constant rain turned the forest floor into mud. Men fought and died in the dark beneath the tree canopy, often unable to see more than a few yards. James's squad, along with thousands of other American soldiers, pushed into the forest with orders to clear it. They advanced yard by yard, taking casualties from hidden machine guns, artillery, mines, and booby traps. The forest seemed to eat men, swallowing them into its dark embrace and offering nothing in return. Private Davis stepped on a mine 3 days into the forest fighting. James heard the click, saw Davis's face go white with terror as he realized what was about to happen. "Don't move!" James shouted, but it was too late. The mine exploded, and Davis's lower body simply disappeared. He died screaming, and there was nothing anyone could do but watch. They marked the location and moved on, because stopping meant dying. More men died in the following days. A sniper got Private Henderson, putting a bullet through his forehead. A mortar barrage killed 2 more. Trenchfoot and exposure hospitalized several others. The squad that had started with 8 men was down to 4. James, Miller, Kowalski, and a replacement named Johnson, who barely spoke, but somehow survived when more experienced men died. The fighting in the Hurtgen forest continued through November into December, achieving nothing of strategic value while costing thousands of American lives. James later learned that his division alone took over 5,000 casualties in the forest, often advancing less than a mile for each 1,000 men lost. It was a meat grinder, a calculated waste of American lives in pursuit of objectives that didn't matter. By early December, James's unit was pulled out of the Hurtgen forest, what remained of them. They were sent to a quiet sector in the Ardennes region of Belgium, a place where exhausted units went to rest and refit. The Ardennes was considered a backwater, lightly defended by both sides. Unlikely to see serious action, the sector they occupied was beautiful in a bleak way: rolling hills covered in snow, small Belgian villages, and dense forests. The locals were friendly, grateful to be liberated, offering what little they had to the American soldiers. James's depleted squad was billeted in a farmhouse near the village of Bastogne, enjoying the luxury of a roof over their heads and, occasionally, hot food. "This is the life," Miller said one evening, warming himself by a fire while a Belgian farmer's wife served them soup. "Beats the hell out of the Hurtgen forest." "Enjoy it while it lasts," James replied, though even he was allowing himself to relax slightly. "We'll be back in action soon enough." "You think the war will be over by Christmas? Some of the guys are saying Germany's about to collapse." "I don't know. The Germans keep surprising us with how hard they fight. I wouldn't count on anything." On the morning of December 16th, 1944, James was awoken by the sound of artillery. Not the occasional harassing fire both sides exchanged, but a massive, sustained barrage, thousands of guns firing simultaneously. He was on his feet instantly, his combat instincts overriding the drowsiness of sleep. "What the hell?" Kowalski said, stumbling to the window. The eastern horizon was lit with muzzle flashes and explosions. The artillery barrage was coming from the German lines, and it was bigger than anything James had experienced since Normandy. "This isn't harassment fire," James said grimly. This is preparation for an attack, a big one. Get everyone up and ready to move. Now!" Within minutes, his squad was armed and assembled, along with the other scattered American units in the area. Officers appeared, their faces showing confusion and concern. No one had expected this. Intelligence had insisted the Germans lacked the resources for a major offensive. Intelligence, it turned out, was wrong. German forces, 3 entire armies that had been secretly assembled and hidden from Allied observation, smashed into the lightly defended Ardennes sector. It was Hitler's last gamble, a massive offensive designed to split the Allied forces, recapture Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace. It would become known as the Battle of the Bulge, the largest and bloodiest battle fought by American forces in World War II. James's unit found itself directly in the path of a German armored column. Orders came down to delay the German advance as long as possible, buying time for reinforcements to arrive. It was a suicide mission dressed up in military language, and everyone knew it. But it had to be done. They set up hasty roadblocks, using felled trees and what few anti-tank mines they had. Then they waited as the sound of German tank engines grew louder, accompanied by the march of thousands of infantry boots. "Here they come," Miller said unnecessarily, his voice tight with tension. The German column appeared through the snow and morning mist like something from a nightmare. Tanks, Tiger IIs and Panthers, the most fearsome armor Germany possessed. Half-tracks full of infantry, self-propelled guns, artillery pieces. It was overwhelming force, applied at a single point, exactly what the Americans couldn't stop. "Wait until they're close," James ordered, his voice calmer than he felt. "Make every shot count." The Germans reached the roadblock and paused, infantry dismounting to clear the obstacles. That's when James gave the order to fire. American rifles and machine guns opened up, cutting down German soldiers. A bazooka team destroyed the lead tank, blocking the road. For a few glorious minutes, the German advance was stalled. Then German artillery and tank guns found their positions, and hell arrived. Shells exploded among the American foxholes. A Tiger II's 88mm gun fired at point-blank range, the shell obliterating an entire position. German infantry, supported by armor, began advancing through American lines. "Fall back!" someone was shouting. "Fall back to the secondary line!" James and his squad retreated through the snow, firing as they moved, trying to maintain some semblance of order. All around them, other American units were doing the same, fighting a desperate delaying action against overwhelming odds. They managed to reach the village of Bastogne, where American forces were coalescing into a coherent defense. The town was strategically important, sitting at the center of a crucial road network. Orders came down to hold it at all costs. The Germans wanted Bastogne. The Americans needed to deny it to them. Over the following days, as German forces surrounded the town and cut it off from reinforcement, James and thousands of other American soldiers prepared for siege. Supplies were limited. Ammunition was rationed. The weather was brutal, with snow and freezing temperatures. The situation seemed hopeless. A German delegation approached under a flag of truce, demanding surrender. The American commander, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, sent back a one-word reply: "Nuts!" The siege continued. James's squad fought from the perimeter, defending against repeated German assaults. They were cold, hungry, low on ammunition, and surrounded. But they didn't break. Every German attack was thrown back, usually at terrible cost to both sides. On Christmas Eve, James sat in a frozen foxhole with Miller, eating the last of his rations and trying to remember what Christmas felt like back home. "You think we'll make it?" Miller asked. "I don't know," James admitted, "but we've made it this far. One more day, one more fight. That's all we can do. If we don't, I want you to know you've been like a brother to me, Sully. Best friend I ever had." "Same, kid. Same." They sat in silence, watching snow fall on the Belgian countryside, two American soldiers far from home, holding a line that couldn't be allowed to break. The weather cleared on December 26th, allowing Allied aircraft to drop supplies and provide air support. The tide began to turn. Patton's Third Army broke through the German encirclement, relieving Bastogne. The German offensive, which had come so close to success, began to falter and then collapse. By early January 1945, the Battle of the Bulge was over. The Germans had lost their last offensive capability, sacrificing men and equipment they couldn't replace in a desperate gamble that failed. The road to Germany was open again. James had survived again, though at what cost he was still processing. His squad was down to just him and Miller. Kowalski had been killed on Christmas Day by German artillery. Johnson had frozen to death in his foxhole on the coldest night of the siege. They were gone, like so many others, their lives traded for a Belgian town that most Americans had never heard of, but which had proved to be a crucial turning point. That night, with Bastogne secured and reinforcements pouring in, James wrote what he knew might be his final letter home. Dear Mom, Dad, and Mary, I've been through something these past weeks that I don't have words to adequately describe. The Germans launched a massive surprise attack, and we were right in its path. We've been surrounded, cut off, fighting for our lives in conditions that would break most people. But we held. Against everything the Germans threw at us, we held. And now, finally, we're being relieved. We won. Again, we won. I'm tired beyond description. I've lost more friends. I've seen things that will never leave me. But I'm still alive, still fighting, and somehow after everything, still believing this is worth it. The war is almost over. I can feel it now. The Germans are finished. They just used up their last reserves in this failed offensive. By spring, we'll be in Germany. By summer, we'll have won. And then, God willing, I'll come home. I've survived Omaha Beach, the hedgerows, Paris, Aachen, the Hurtgen Forest, and now the Battle of the Bulge. I've survived things that killed men much better than me. I have to believe that means something, that there's a reason I'm still here when so many others aren't. Maybe I'm meant to survive to tell their stories. Maybe I'm meant to carry their memories home. Maybe I'm just lucky. I don't know, but I'm going to make it count. Every day I live, every action I take will honor those who didn't make it this far. I love you all more than I can express. I'm coming home. I promise you that. I've come too far, survived too much to fail now. Your son and brother, James. The winter of 1945 passed in a blur of combat and misery as Allied forces pushed back the German Bulge and prepared for the final offensive into Germany. James was promoted again, this time to sergeant, and given command of a reconstituted squad made up mostly of fresh replacements. He trained them as best he could in the brief time available, trying to pass on the lessons he'd learned at such terrible cost. Miller was still with him, now a corporal himself, still the farm kid from Kansas who'd somehow survived everything the war threw at him. Together, they led their men through the final campaigns, crossing the Rhine into Germany's heartland, liberating concentration camps where the full horror of Nazi evil was revealed, and pushing toward the Elbe River where American and Soviet forces would link up. The end, when it came, seemed almost anticlimactic. German resistance collapsed. Units surrendered by the thousands. On May 7, 1945, Germany unconditionally surrendered. The war in Europe was over. James received the news in a small German town whose name he never learned. The men around him cheered, cried, and celebrated. He simply sat down, feeling numb. It was over. After nearly a year of combat, after Omaha Beach and Formigny and Aachen and the Hurtgen Forest and Bastogne and 100 other places, it was finally over. "Sully, we made it!" Miller was shouting, grabbing James in a bear hug. "We actually made it! We're going home!" "Yeah," James said, the reality slowly penetrating. "Yeah, we're going home." That night, he wrote his final wartime letter. "Dear Mum, Dad and Mary, the war is over. Germany has surrendered after everything, after all the fighting and dying and sacrifice. We've won. I'm alive, I'm whole more or less, and I'm coming home. I don't know what kind of man you'll find when I walk through our door in Boston. I'm not the boy who left. I've seen and done things that changed me fundamentally. I've lost friends who were closer than brothers. I've killed men and watched men die. I've liberated concentration camps where evil wore a human face and perpetrated horrors beyond imagination. But I've also seen the best of humanity. I've seen ordinary Americans do extraordinary things because it was right. I've seen courage and sacrifice and selflessness that proves humans are capable of greatness. I've seen people liberated from tyranny weep with joy and gratitude. I've been part of something larger and more important than myself. I'm proud of what we did, proud of my service, my unit, and my country. We came to Europe to fight evil, and we won. The cost was terrible, but the alternative would have been far worse. I'll be home as soon as the army releases me. It might be weeks or months, but I'm coming home. And when I do, I'm going to spend the rest of my life earning the second chance I've been given. All those men who didn't make it, Tommy Chen, Eddie Kowalski, and thousands of others whose names I'll carry forever. They deserve to be remembered. They deserve to have their sacrifice mean something. I'll make sure it does. I'll live the life they can't. I'll raise a family, contribute to our community, work to make America worthy of their sacrifice. That's my promise to them and to you. I love you all. I'm coming home. Your son and brother, James. The journey home took weeks. Processing, paperwork, transport across the Atlantic to an America that seemed impossibly peaceful and prosperous after war-torn Europe. When James finally stepped off the train in Boston on a warm July morning in 1945, his family was waiting. His mother cried. His father gripped his hand with fierce pride. Mary, now 11, and almost unrecognizable as the child he'd left behind, wrapped her arms around his waist and wouldn't let go. "Welcome home, son," his father said, his voice rough with emotion. "Welcome home." James looked at his family, at the city he'd grown up in, at the normal, peaceful life he'd fought so hard to preserve. He thought of Tommy Chen and Eddie Kowalski and Sergeant Patterson and all the others who should be here having their own reunions but never would. "I'm home," he said simply, "and I'm never going to forget what it cost to get here." In the years that followed, James did exactly what he'd promised. He married a girl from the neighborhood, raised 3 children, worked as a machinist, and became active in his community. He spoke at schools about the war, ensuring that young people understood the price of freedom. He attended reunions with the men he'd served with, fewer each year as age and illness claimed what the Germans couldn't. He kept his letters, the journal of his war experience, and decades later, when his grandchildren asked about his service, he would read from them. He told stories of courage and sacrifice, of ordinary men who did extraordinary things when their country called. "Your grandfather was a hero," his grandchildren would say. "No," James would reply every time, "the heroes are the ones who didn't come home. I'm just a survivor who's trying to honor their memory by living a good life." But in his heart, in the quiet moments when memory transported him back to French beaches and Belgian forests, James knew the truth. They were all heroes. Every man who'd put on the uniform, crossed the ocean, and stood against tyranny when it mattered most. The living and the dead, the celebrated and the forgotten, all bound together by service and sacrifice. The last letter home had been written in June 1944, when death seemed certain and every word might be the last. But James had lived to write many more letters, to come home and build the life his fallen comrades never could. And in living that life, fully and well, he ensured that their sacrifice was never forgotten, that their fight for freedom echoed through generations. That, more than medals or commendations, was the true honor: to remember, to tell the story, to ensure that future generations understood what their freedom cost and who paid the price. James Michael Sullivan, Sergeant, United States Army, veteran of Omaha Beach and the Battle of the Bulge, lived to be 92 years old. At his funeral, hundreds attended, family, friends, and veterans from multiple generations. His letters were read aloud, his service honored, his life celebrated. And in a place of honor in the family home, carefully preserved behind glass, hung a single letter, written in a young man's hand on the evening before D-Day, when death seemed certain and the future impossibly distant. The last letter home that became the first chapter of a life well lived. "Dear Mom, Dad, and Mary," it began. "If you're reading this, then I didn't make it home like I promised." But he had made it home. Against all odds, through all the horror and chaos and violence, James Sullivan had made it home, and in doing so, he honored every promise he'd made, to his family, to his fallen comrades, and to the country he'd fought to preserve. The letter ended where it had always been meant to end, not with death, but with life, not with defeat, but with victory, not with an ending, but with a new beginning, earned through sacrifice and sealed with the blood of patriots. America was free. Europe was free, and James Michael Sullivan, along with millions of his fellow soldiers, had made it so. That was the true last letter home, not words on paper, but a life lived in testimony to the values they'd fought for: freedom, democracy, justice. The simple right to live without fear, to raise families in peace, to pursue happiness without tyranny's shadow. The war had been won. The letters had all been sent. And in living rooms across America, families gathered around men who'd been to hell and back, listening to their stories, honoring their service, and understanding, perhaps for the first time, the terrible and beautiful truth about the price of freedom. It is never free. It must be earned, defended, and sometimes bought with blood. But once won, once secured, it becomes the most precious inheritance any generation can pass to the next. James understood this. Tommy Chen had understood it. Every man who'd stormed those beaches, fought through those hedgerows, held at Bastogne and pushed into Germany, understood it. And now, through James's letters and his long life of service and memory, future generations would understand it too. The last letter home had finally reached its destination, not just to a family in Boston, but to all of America, to all who would listen, to all who needed to hear the story of ordinary men who did extraordinary things when their country called. Welcome home, soldier. Welcome home.